Even though geopolitics as a discipline in the modern sense is a Western concept originated in late 19th century Germany, non-Western civilizations such as China also have their distinctive way of conceiving how geography shapes their existence in the world in relations with other entities. Throughout its millenary history, China has developed a peculiar geopolitical mindframe that still influences its foreign policy today. I'm your host Kasim, and thanks for joining me for another KJ vid. In this video we will discuss China's geopolitical school of thinking. But just before we start, please kindly visit our website kjvids.co.uk and subscribe to one of our plans, which will give you unlimited access to our content and the full transcripts of these reports. The first thing to examine in order to understand China's geopolitical self-perception is to examine the philosophical principles upon which it is based. There are three levels: the family, the kingdom and the world. And all of them should be organized in a hierarchical but harmonious way where each element has its role and naturally pursues it for the stability of the system. In practice, keeping order in the kingdom means ensuring peace at home by preserving the sovereignty of the state, while maintaining the world order translates into establishing an international system that grants China's security. With this focus on peace and harmony, Confucianism rejected expansionism and considered war as a last resort practice that was only to be waged for defensive purposes. Of course, this was always not the case in practice, since throughout history, China has repeatedly expanded its borders to increase its power, control vital trade outposts along the Silk Road, or improve its own security. These aspects are closely related to the traditional imperial concept of Tianxia, which means under the heaven. In ancient China, the emperor was considered as the guarantor of harmony and peace, which it had to be ensured on a universal scale. That is, it should cover everything located under the heaven. However, this was never achieved, as tribes and kingdoms outside of China's sovereignty have always existed. As a result, the Chinese developed a concentric view of the international system. At the core lay China itself, considered to be the center of the world in geographic but also in cultural terms. Chinese civilization was considered superior to that of surrounding populations deemed as barbarians. It was also believed that China was a beacon of culture that spilled over to nearby peoples and civilized them. Another important aspect is the yin-yang juxtaposition described by Taoism. The yin is regarded as a passive and subordinate element, while the yang is the active, creative and dominant one. The two coexist and blend in a harmonious manner. In war, this should translate into initially adopting a passive stance and then performing a counterattack from a position of strength. Such belief is reflected in the writings of Sun Tzu, China's most famous strategist and author of the military methods, better known as the art of war. In his book, Sun Tzu repeatedly mentions in the Tao, which means the way, and he describes how to dynamically combine stillness and movement to defeat the enemy. He insists on how military leaders should avoid a direct confrontation, especially with the bulk of the enemy forces, and instead leverage on the areas where the adversary is weak by exploiting the potential of the situation. This is to be done by waiting, or even better by actively creating a proper opportunity, allowing to strike from his strength position, either by deceiving or outmaneuvering the enemy. The ultimate aim and supreme achievement of the general is to win without fighting, so to triumph in a cost-effective manner. These concepts are deeply rooted in Chinese strategic thinking, as they are found in other works such as those of Sun Bin, an alleged descendant of Sun Tzu, and the 100 Unorthodox Strategies whose author is unknown. A final point to be mentioned is Go, an ancient but still popular Chinese strategy board game. At first sight it looks simpler than chess. There are two players, one using white stones and the other black ones. On each turn the player must place a stone on the board which is initially empty. Depending on how it places the stones, the player can turn the opponent's one into its own. But in reality, Go is actually way more complex than chess. It requires much skill and most of all a global long-term vision, as it all depends on correctly placing the stones in a prospective strategic manner to control the largest area of the board. Basically, the game is all about creating a sphere of influence greater than that of the other player. As it will be seen, China is applying the principles of Go to extend its global influence. Like all great civilizations, China considered itself to be the center of the world. Its very name in Chinese reflects this conception, Gonggo, which literally means the Middle Kingdom. Here it is important to remind that through much of its history, China's borders were much smaller than the current ones. In fact, its territory was often limited to the large coastal strip of agricultural plains formed by the Yellow River and the Yangtze River basins. This was the economic, demographic and cultural core of the realm, where the Han population was concentrated. As we have seen, the main problem was dealing with other peoples. Throughout history, the Chinese have attempted to solve the issue by integrating the other kingdoms into a Sino-centric vassal system. Subject states had to recognize China's superior authority and offer some tribute, but the whole issue was often largely symbolic and the vassal states were essentially autonomous. Yet this allowed China to maintain positive relations and thus to ensure the safety of its borders. Still, the Chinese occasionally launched military campaigns to protect their vassals, as in the case of the Korean Joseon Kingdom against the Japanese invasion in the late 16th century. And other times they also attacked neighbouring territories like Vietnam, which was invaded multiple times. The matter was more problematic in the case of nomad tribes in the north. These represented a continuous threat for China for centuries, and in 2 occasions they managed to conquer the country and establish imperial dynasties, as in the case of the Mongol Yan dynasty in the 13th century or the Manchu Qing dynasty in the 17th century. Against these barbarian tribes, the Chinese had often no choice but to set up defensive positions along the border, such as the Great Wall, or to conduct military campaigns to eliminate the menace. In the event that a foreign tribe managed to conquer China, then the Chinese relied on their soft power. They were confident that their superior culture would ultimately absorb the invaders and turn them into Chinese, and in fact this was actually the case of both the Yan and the Qing. In spite of its flaws and repeated failures, the China-centric system continued to exist for centuries until the superiority of the Western powers and Japan drove China into submission. This tragic period lasted from 1839 to 1949 and is known as the Century of Humiliation, which is a central component of the national identity of modern-day China. Since its creation, the People's Republic of China has implemented a strategy to preserve its sovereignty and prevent foreign interferences, and this is largely based upon the century-old principles we have discussed. First of all, China wanted to protect its core, which still consists of the coastal area along the 2 great rivers. Just like in the past, this strip of land hosts the vast majority of the Han population and is the country's economic heart, where the main cities and therefore industrial and financial centres are located there. Threats against this zone can come either from the sea or from the land. The need to defend the coastline from a foreign aggression is one of the main reasons why China has been building up its navy and has fielded so-called anti-access area denial platforms like long-range anti-ship ballistic missiles. China's main concern is to deter or defeat an American intervention, most notably in the case of a contingency over Taiwan. In this logic, it has developed a strategy based on 3 defense layers to keep the US forces far from its coasts. On the land side, the threat of nomad tribes has disappeared, but to protect its heartland, China still wants to control a vast buffer zone to increase its strategic depth. This is why Xinjiang and Tibet were swiftly occupied immediately after the creation of China, and also why the current leadership is so determined to keep these 2 regions under control. In this sense, it can be said that China is an island. The western areas are a buffer zone to protect China's core, just like the sea is to the east. In regards to the territorial disputes it is involved in, notably the one over the South China Sea, China is implementing the classic principles of Chinese strategy. It seeks to avoid an open confrontation, and in many cases it employs paramilitary forces and naval militias to assert its claim without resorting to the military, and it gradually builds facilities and deploys its forces to strengthen its position. Finally, amid a revival of Confucianism at the state level, the old conception of a harmonious Sinocentric order has re-emerged. China is representing its One Belt One Road infrastructure initiative as a peaceful and mutually beneficial project, but it still remains one that has China at the centre. In addition, many observers note that the strategy that China is employing in building these infrastructures resembles the game of Go. By gradually positioning these facilities and then linking them together, China is slowly expanding its sphere of influence across Eurasia and the Indo-Pacific, but also Africa and South America. This overview shows that China not only has its distinctive geopolitical conception, but also that it still has a deep influence in China, and understanding it is important to properly assess China's current strategy. That's all for today guys, thanks for watching another KJ vid. We hope you enjoyed the video and would love to hear from you in the comments below. Please like, share and subscribe, and don't forget to visit our website kjvids.co.uk, where you can receive unlimited access to our content and the full transcripts of these reports. That's all for now, thanks for watching again and see you next time.